So yeah, Clancy, you can start us out.
Right.
I just wanted to let you know that David Arnold is coming. He just won't be able to join until 1. Just so you're aware.
Perfect. Thanks, Crystal. All right. We will get started then. So I'm going to begin with our statement as usual now. It is a bit shorter now, so that's good.
It is bad. It's shorter.
Well, yeah. It's easier to read. It is Tuesday, November 10th, and it is 12:32 p.m. This meeting will be conducted entirely via electronic means on November 4th, 2020, in accordance with Utah Code 52-4-2074. I determined that conducting meetings of the Provo City Transportation and Mobility Advisory Committee with an anchor location, such as the Community Development Conference Room, presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who may be present there. These are the facts upon which I've made this determination. The World Health Organization has classified novel coronavirus disease, also known as COVID-19, as a pandemic. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention state that COVID-19 is easily spread from person to person between people who are in close contact with one another. The state of Utah is currently subject to a public health emergency order, which limits the size of public gatherings and which requires people to wear face coverings and follow social distancing guidelines. Utah County is currently listed as having a high level of coronavirus transmission. Physical distancing measures will be difficult to set up and maintain in the Community Development Conference Room. The meeting will be available to the public for live broadcast and on-demand viewing at youtube.com/user/Provo Channel 17. All right. Thanks for being here, everybody. I'll just quickly introduce committee members. So I am Clancy Black, TMAC Chair. We've got Joy McMurray with us, Vice Chair. Thanks for being here, Joy. Mitsu Saito, TMAC Committee Member. Thanks for being here. And Larry Urgiaga from Planning Commission. Thanks for being here, Larry. And then Dave Arnold, also a committee member of TMAC, will be joining us later in the meeting. And looks like we've got Jim Hamela, TMAC committee member, here also. So thanks everyone for joining, and also welcome to city staff and other guest presenters that may be here. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. And Robert, I read your email about the agenda. Help me if I get it wrong, though. I think we want to start with item 1 with the general Center Street discussion. And I think you were suggesting we review our notes from last February and also the council's policy intent. Is that where you wanted to start?
That's kind of where I wanted to go. Crystal, do I have screen sharing?
You should.
There we go. Okay, I think we're good. There we go. So Center Street has become a really important topic, and recently the council brought it up again, and so we felt that it would be important for TMAC, in your role as an advisory committee, to kind of have a discussion about Center Street and what we've talked about previously, and look at what the council has said, look at what Bike Park Provo and Downtown Provo Inc. have sent to the council, and make sure that we're still all on board with that, if we need to make any adjustments or recommendations or things like that, and then just reiterate to the council what your position really is. And that can be developed as we go along, but we just kind of wanted to start here with some things that we've talked about previously. Way back in January and February, we were kind of having a discussion on this topic as well. And in January, we talked about at the next meeting, kind of coming up with an idea of what we wanted to see happen on Center Street, if we're still good with the general policies of that. And as we talked, you can see here item 2, these are some of the notes from that meeting. And as we go through that, what that kind of developed into was, we scroll down here, this was what the council received from TMAC. And so I just wanted to reiterate this really quickly. TMAC committee recommends that Provo Municipal Council place renewed emphasis on policies related to downtown Center Street as a pedestrian mall, cited the code, and how that's the current and future vision for Center Street. These policies are supported by downtown Provo neighborhood and the business community. And then we recommend the city more aggressively pursue changes in support of these policies. And then these are the following things that we talked about. Emphasize that Center Street is a destination, not a thoroughfare. Implement traffic calming measures to slow vehicles down as they enter and travel through the downtown Center Street area. Operational changes to incentivize use of alternate routes for east-west mobility, and then engage in further exploration regarding east-west mobility and the future design of Center Street for pedestrian environment and traffic operations. So this is kind of what they got from us early in the year. And so that's just a quick reminder about that one. Recently, in the last couple of weeks, I hope that you all had a chance to read through this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, Clancy, unless you'd like to. I thought, but it's important that the TMAC understand that this is a letter that was sent by Bike Walk Provo and Downtown Provo Inc. to the council and to the mayor, really specifying their continued interest and advocation of a safe Center Street. They're highlighting the fact that speed should be designed for 15 miles per hour. And then they provided a list of things that they would love to see happen with Center Street from 5th West to 100 North. Raised crosswalks, replace missing 15-mile-per-hour speed limit sign, paint sharrows, adjust light signal timing on Center Street to discourage through traffic, adjust the light signal on 100 North to encourage through traffic, and then a left turn lane on 100 North at 5th West. So these were some things that they sent to the council and the mayor just to reiterate their continued interest and desire for a safe Center Street. And then finally, what I wanted to talk about and just make sure that everybody was aware, I believe it was the last council meeting that City Council actually adopted this policy intent statement, basically reaffirming their support of Center Street as a pedestrian mall, and for the downtown pedestrian statement released by Downtown Provo in January 2019. And so this outlines their vision for what they would like to see. And it's also interesting and important to note that it extends to 200 East. Currently, most everything that we have terminates at 100 East as far as the code goes. So just some highlights there. You're welcome to read those as you go along, but that's kind of the background information for this discussion. And now what I felt and what we felt would be important to know, move on from this point, is how does TMAC currently feel about Center Street, about what you want to see, about these, documents and what's been said in the past, what's currently in our code in Chapter 9.30, and then where do we go from here? Do we want to provide a recommendation? Do we want to provide yes, this is great, or no, these are the things that we want to see changed? And so I'll kind of turn that back to you, Clancy, maybe to lead that discussion, and we'll jump in wherever necessary. Gary, do you have any additional things that you want to add to that before we go there?
I think with this, the council is really looking for what TMAC thinks of their vision statement. Would you add to it? Would you take away from it? And we can go to that point. And then the next question is, once you've decided that, what, if anything, do we now do about Center Street? And that's kind of part 2 to this discussion.
Thanks, Robert, and thanks, Gary. I guess I'll start us off with some of my thoughts. I'm just looking at some things. Honestly, in looking at our statement from last February, Bike Walk Provo's letter, and I appreciate Bike Walk Provo's letter and their detail, but I don't know that we today need to get into as much detail in terms of what specifics will be done, but I think their letter and the council's policy intent aligns really well with what we had stated last February. I think the goals are the same. The general approach is very similar. So I mean, I like what the council put together. I think it looks to me like we're all kind of on the same page in what we're wanting and how we're wanting to do it. So those are just my kind of initial thoughts to get us started.
I'm happy to add a little bit to that. I agree that our TMAC statement from last spring still looks good to me. I think those are things we had discussed. I like that both the council's statement and Bike Walk Provo's letter talk about alternate routes. I feel like in solving the Center Street issues, it has to be a twofold approach, both with changing things on Center Street and giving people incentives to pick a different route for those who are crossing east-west direction in Provo. We've talked before about how east-west mobility is a problem, and I have no problem saying we want Center Street to be a destination and to be pedestrian priority, as long as we are mindful of still providing east-west routes. So I really like that that's included in both letters. The council's letter is much less specific. It just says we need to route traffic around Center Street. And I would like to, whereas Bike Walk Provo says, let's go with 100 North. And I know that there's been other efforts at 300 South and 500 North to increase east-west mobility. So that's all part of the solution. But I think I'm really glad that that aspect is included. I do wonder, I know we might be talking about this later in the meeting, that extension to 200 East. Again, I'm not familiar with what's going on at that one block north-south chunk of 100 East, but I wonder if that wouldn't be a better place to make the jog for the thoroughfare, since 200 East just pushes a little more into neighborhood territory, and we're really planning a long-term east-west thoroughfare. I still wonder about the possibilities of 100 East as the transition point, but I don't know the details of that.
Yeah, I definitely want to get into that discussion more also, Joy. So I think we'll hear more about that here in a minute for sure.
Yeah, I know that Rob Hunter's on with us, and that's one of the things that he's wanting to talk about, and so we'll definitely make sure that we have time for that.
Is there anything in the council's statement that members of TMAC would suggest taking out, or some additions that you would suggest putting into it?
Two things that I noticed and maybe are worth consideration. The first two bullets under timing and implementation. The first one, going forward, every decision and every project that impacts Center Street should be made with an eye toward achieving the vision. I wonder if we should expand that to any project that impacts east-west mobility from 8th North to 3rd South should be evaluated with this in mind, because getting that east-west mobility, we have to look at all those routes. So the statement in here is correct and good, but I feel like any east-west transportation project should be evaluated in this context as well.
So in there saying that if there's an east-west project from 8th North to 3rd South, as a part of that project, we should analyze the impact it would have on Center Street.
Yeah, like, is this project going to make it easier for vehicles to go east-west not on Center Street? Will it drive more traffic to Center Street? Will it support access to Center Street without using Center Street? Those are the questions I would have, and maybe that's too expansive, but like Joy pointed out, I think we talked about east-west mobility a little more in our letter, and I don't know that they need to here, but that's one thing that stood out to me.
Can someone tell me that second bullet under timing and implementation, Center Street infrastructure should not be overhauled in one large project? Where did that come from? I'm not necessarily against it. I'm just wondering, what was the thinking behind that statement?
That was my next question also.
Okay, great.
I think it may have a genesis, that statement several years ago. We put together quite a large group to study Center Street, and Mayor John Curtis at the time told us, don't worry about anything. Kind of do your big wish list of what it is that you would want to do. If you were starting with a clean slate, what would you do? And a part of that, as we approached it and looked at it, there's quite a few things that could be done on Center Street that people really like. But they were, one, very expensive, and two, the projects. If you did one project, you basically shut down Center Street for a year to be able to do this project. It would probably kill most of the businesses along Center Street. So I think this timing and implementation bullet point is intended to get to the idea of as we look at improvements that can be done to Center Street to achieve the above vision, we need to be careful about doing it in just one big project at one time that might have some very adverse consequences. Any improvements you make, you've got to be very careful with not only the improvement, but how you do it and when you do it.
And I think, like Gary said, that was looked at, with Mayor Curtis, because you had new skin, you also had the new, the temple renovation, and we disconnected 100 South and we disconnected 100 West. So those streets were disconnected, and we're saying, as part of that, why don't we look at, since there's this momentum that was at the time to say, oh, we're going to close or make the cognate to close those streets, which allow the redistribution of traffic through the area. What does Center Street now become with that? And did we at that time need to change Center Street to something, the wish list? And that is their momentum to do that. because you have to understand at the time, again, we closed off 100 South, that street got closed, and then 100 West. So through that downtown area, it was chosen that those streets would, we would no longer have those streets.
So I think this bullet point is trying to get to the idea of it. Any improvements we would make to Center Street to further our vision ought to be done incrementally and phased appropriately.
For the purpose of being sensitive to the businesses and residents of that area?
I think so. And so that's part of the discussion that we're having here. Would you like to amplify or beef up some of the statements that you see in the council? The council has passed this intent statement. They've now given it to TMAC and said, look, we passed this. Would you guys review it? And from your perspective now, tell us where you would recommend we would change this document by either adding some things to it or clarifying some things or taking some things away. And so if that second bullet point doesn't make a lot of sense to you, then perhaps you could, I think that's the background and genesis of the idea. TMAC certainly could recommend a refining of that to clarify what you think the intent of that should be.
And I think one of the things that has been discussed is unintended consequences, right?
Yes.
Depending on which, features or implemented measures that you take to achieve these objectives or this vision could have substantial unintended consequences. So their concern was, like, instead of doing something major that we cannot take back, because we didn't really do or feel a great understanding of what those unintended consequences may be. We want to make sure that, as far as what I had understood maybe from the council, is we kind of want to do this in slow process, so that if something doesn't seem to meet that or doesn't really accomplish the vision objectives, that we are not tied into something very substantial.
Yeah. One concern I think people have is, before spending a lot of money on a project, one approach to this could be recommending that the city might adopt, when it makes sense, some sort of interim design measure to test out an idea that we have on Center Street that would be a major expense or a major change to downtown. And a lot of communities are doing that. And the council had a presentation recently from our consultant who's working on our general plan, showing how they did that in a community in an area somewhat similar to Center Street, and did some fairly low cost interim design standards. And at the end of it, got back some very valuable information and went forward on some aspects and didn't go forward on other aspects of the project.
So, my thoughts, I would definitely prefer that second bullet be reworded to explain the intent, because, I mean, if in the future we find a design that works and we like it and there's a big grant to do it, and I think it'd be better to explain the concern and the intent rather than saying we won't do a large project.
I agree that
it may make sense to do a large project in the right circumstances.
Right. I don't think you should box yourself in to possible future opportunities. Not that I'm saying, hey, we should do Center Street in a big project, but in case something came up, you don't want to limit those options. But you could certainly say something like, at the moment we see it progressing in small projects or with great sensitivity to potential impacts or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Which they kind of talk about in bullet 3.
Yeah, and I totally agree with what I think bullet 3 says and what you're describing, Gary. Like, I mean, we could put up a concrete barrier to block a lane and see what happens with only one lane. We could try all kinds of things for a couple weeks to see how it works before a design is selected and before big changes happen. I think that's brilliant and a perfect way to go about it. Jim or Mitsu or anyone else, any thoughts on these?
One question I've always had, and it seems to be maybe you guys could help me from a traffic engineer's perspective here, is help me understand maybe from your guys' perspective. And I think, the council here, and I've heard it, is it feels safe. Maybe you can help, because some of the tough things that we deal with is, yeah, we have where they say objectively safe. We have specific data measurements that say whether this is. What we don't have is that soft, well, this feels safe. Because I've heard from others and had conversations from many others that feel, and I think it's even expressed in TMAC, where Center Street, well, to me, it feels safe. And others have expressed, for me, it doesn't feel safe. And so for me, I'm not sure. Help me understand, because I know your TMAC has said the same thing. What does feel safe mean to you? Because as we do through these options and we look through different things to reach those objectives, I'm not sure from my perspective, what does that mean?
I'm not sure that you can get a definitive statement on what feels safe. It's more of a consensus statement, or you get to a feeling of safe when you have a variety of people representing the community identifying what feels safe. And I guess the first place where we could begin to articulate a feel safe subjective standard would be here at TMAC. But and then to further my thoughts on this, Shane, I don't recall being advised of what the prior, I think it was Gary who said that under Mayor Curtis, there was a big effort to identify what could be done on Center Street. Did we ever get a list of what that effort produced? What are the things that the committee at that time identified as things that should be done or could be done on Center Street? Or has that been considered and set aside entirely, that whole effort?
I think from my understanding, I wasn't here. I think it was back in 12. If you're Gary, maybe you can help maybe a little bit. I wasn't here at the city at the time, but my understanding was, again, the temple and the new skin was coming in. We were shutting down some of the local streets, first south, first west, which kind of starts to limit, as some of these bullet points are rerouting traffic around Center Street, or the ability to distribute traffic in an effective manner around Center Street. So as far as I understand, they were tasked, I think the engineering, I can only speak for engineering, were tasked to look at what could we do in order to meet the objective of pedestrian mall, and what that definition was in some fashion. And so they went down the path of taking, if it was to do this, to take lanes off. We want to get traffic off Center Street. It is, whether that's positive or negative right now, it does have a high volume of traffic through there. And so it was discussed to, let's maybe start that redistribution process by taking lanes off there. If we were to take lanes off there, what does that look like? What does that do from a modeling standpoint? They looked at it and looked at that from, a level of service, through the corridor. And would that even work? What would that distribution look like? They went down that path and said, yeah, it could work. There's going to be some points that are going to be Fifth West was going to be a point of issue. Second West started to become a point of an issue as well. But they said, in doing that, let's put a cost together, just an idea of the wish list. And that was to take lanes off there. That was to reduce it down to a 2-lane facility. and basically looked at what the cost is to reconstruct that to a 2-lane facility. And what was determined from that was a substantial cost, roughly about $1 million a block face to get those pedestrian improvements, to get that feel, I guess that idea of what it was to feel at the time, feel what they were envisioning, reduction in traffic, and then making that area what would more defined as a pedestrian mall.
I guess that's where I was headed, Shane, is was there a discussion at that time about what, quote, feels safe, unquote?
I don't know if that was, I think it was, here's ideas that we had. I think from my understanding was the reduction of traffic to really feel, the idea to make that feel safe was to reduce that traffic and make that really more of an area where the eating outside, that whole feeling, ability to walk this, and I think and I can't remember, there was some other, if I remember correctly, again, I'm just going from secondhand information. There was other cities and things that were kind of used as examples of what that was and what that looked like from a pedestrian mall. But from what I understand, though, they went down that path and kind of just got initial high-level cost estimates, and it was kind of determined that, from a feasibility cost standpoint, I don't think that we could ever get there in, one failed swoop.
I could try to give specific examples of what feels unsafe. You go to a mid-block crossing and you're there as a pedestrian and the cars never stop. They don't recognize it as a crosswalk. So if we really want to feel that the pedestrian in that crosswalk has the right of the way, the vehicles are not honoring that, because you'll stand there until the light changes, until the cars stop before you can cross. And that happens every time I go downtown and try to use, well, almost every time, unless the traffic's really low, when I try to use a mid-block crossing. There's been many times that I've just given up on the mid-block and I've gone to because I don't feel unsafe at the signalized intersection crosswalks. But I've given up a number of times on the mid-block crossings because I don't feel safe. It feels less safe at night on those mid-block crossings. It's dark. I don't know if maybe they're not lit well. I haven't really paid attention. Maybe they are lit well. But so that's one issue, is the mid-block crossing. The other is more of you drive and you park in the middle and you don't know what to do. There's no clear sidewalk in the middle. What little strip there is broken up with holes in it. There's trees in it. And so you're now trying to navigate from the middle parking zone to get yourself to a sidewalk. And you've got cars zipping back and forth. They're not stopping for you. You're now find yourself, it's almost like you stopped on an island. It's like you took a crosswalk halfway across and now you're stuck in the island trying to figure out how to get across the rest of the lanes of traffic. And so that's the two things that I've noticed: the mid-block crossings and when I park in the middle and I'm trying to get myself to a sidewalk.
And I think those are great examples. That from my perspective helps me understand, David, what direction that we should be looking at. I think that's where we have been at. Okay. And in doing that, what does that mean? What does that mean for Center Street? Those are things that what that means we've kind of direction from us, like what that means. We can start getting, a direction towards.
David, that's what that committee talked about, that I was talking about earlier. And we ran that committee. We brought people in, asked them, what do you like best about Center Street? What don't you like? What makes you feel uncomfortable? The center islands where you park, there's no good way to cross in there, exactly like you described. And so it was, forget about moving traffic through Center Street. We'll deal with that some other time. Forget about all of those concerns. Design a Center Street that you would like, that would make you feel comfortable. It'd be a destination. And let's do that first. We can talk about where we would route traffic, how we would route traffic later. And let's get our arms around that. And it came back and there was lots of ideas. to make the pedestrian experience very safe, very comfortable, so that vehicles would stop for pedestrians. Pedestrians would be prioritized over vehicles. And then this second part of it was going to be, okay, now once we've come up with a design that people feel good about, what are the impacts to our current traffic patterns? What's the long-term implication of those things? And what would a rough cost estimate be? And it came down to, at least with the cost estimates, it was $1 million a block face. And it would take about a year of construction for the block face. So you could either do all of Center Street at once or do a block or two face at a time each year for several years. And so it really didn't go much farther because there was not funding for that. And there was concern about the impact to businesses downtown. And so back to that bullet point. But to describe how Center Street's not safe, I think that is one of the main complaints I've heard now, I've heard all the way through are those mid-block crossings. Nobody stops. People respect the traffic lights, but they don't respect the mid-block crossings. And so how do we get vehicles get pedestrians prioritized over vehicles? I think that's been really the main issue.
I have a question. Has the driver's been told that by signs or something that the pedestrian may cross mid-block? Maybe this is a question for Shane.
Well, and I think that's something we've actually brought up. And I think one of our suggestions has been, initially, and I think we're on board to say, look, is it something that if, and you say to feel safe, and one of these initial measures are, and I'm not saying, and that's where we're trying to, understand maybe some TMAC. Yeah, if the bulb out, mid-block crossings, and those are some things that we need to focus on, the feeling of safe, and what that is. I think one of the suggestions is we put out there, and this may or may not be rapid fire beacons. We're willing to look at those things. Absolutely. That makes that aware that the pedestrian is there. But that's where we come to you. Is that from your perspective, is that the right direction? Is that what you would like to see? Or does that still make the presentation that pedestrians are kind of second in this corridor, as we need something flashing and everything going here? I'm not making that. That's where we're kind of come to you. What would you like to see? I've gotten, on just that simple of a device, I've gotten some very negative pushback, and I've gotten some very positive pushback. And so we're really just trying to say, okay, this is your vision. Initially, what would you like to see in order to help accomplish some of these things? Specifically, one of those is actually that, the feeling of being able to safely cross the street at a mid-block crossing.
Right.
It seems to me that we have two things we need to wrestle with. One is, what is the vision? Do we agree with the vision statement, or does it need of the council? Does it need to be modified in some way? And then once we get a sense of what vision is, an agreement on vision, then it seems to me that we can begin to wrestle with the issues of what do we do specifically. As far as vision goes, I think the vision statement is terrific. And I don't personally see anything that we might do to change that. In terms of the timing and implementation statement, I think bullet 2 could be amended to simply say that the Center Street infrastructure should not be overhauled in one large project so as to not adversely impact local businesses and residents, or something like and or it could be, fleshed out a little bit more. But this whole discussion strikes me as being one of, I think we're in general agreement on the vision statement. And then the issue is, well, if we are, then are we being looked at TMAC to start coming up with some suggestions for what could be done to implement that vision?
Yeah, I agree, Jim. And I'd like us to kind of wrap up this item in terms of the council's statement. So if we could each kind of add our final thoughts, and then we'll continue on to item 2, which is still related to this. So I'll just agree with Jim that I think the vision is perfect. I think that second bullet, I agree with what Jim said. I'll say again what I said earlier, that I think bullet 1 under timing and implementation should also consider any type of east-west transportation project, because I think those all could impact Center Street. So those are my thoughts.
And I think, Clancy, I think that's great, because we do need to understand that. I think you were part of the transportation retreat that started looking at this from a regional perspective. And what we have to understand is Center Street, this downtown area, as we call a destination, is a regional area, right? And what happens regionally from a transportation standpoint will absolutely impact Center Street. Whether we move forward with projects or we don't move forward, we'll have definitely a direct bearing on Center Street.
Thanks, Shane. Mitsu, Joy, and Dave, if you want to offer any final additions regarding the council's intent statement here?
I think, like other people said, the vision is fine, and I felt the second bullet in the timing implementation was kind of vague, but we already discussed, and the we need to kind of balance the driver's need and the pedestrian cross. But at Center Street, although it's a mall, if people randomly cross anywhere between the mid-block, and that's an issue because we're creating, to me, really unsafe. If we could put the mid-block crossing, where, let's say, between 2nd and 3rd West, I don't know how long the link is, but in the middle, you create 2 pedestrian crossing, and some of those crossing can use crossing painting that gives optical illusion that looks to the driver as if it's a 3D floating. So there's a case, I think it was India first, and because of the optical illusion, even if people are not there, driver feels unsafe and slow down. So you can, and then this is an inexpensive solution to me, just a painting.
Well, and I can say, just for that specifically, Matsu, we painted those brick patterns, right? So all the crossings have this, and I'll let you know, it's fairly costly. It's fairly costly, high thermoplastic paint that lasts a long time.
Better than digging, no?
Yeah.
But digging,
And that was, I think that was the same thing, in discussions we had. That was kind of where that came from, was same as the discussion that you just brought up is why we installed those brick pattern painting, because we didn't want to go ahead and install brick patterns. This goes back to not doing anything major. Similar to that is actually installing a brick pattern, actual bricks in the street, which is very, very costly to do that. So they made the initial, this is something same kind of discussion in the past, to make that decision to go down with a painted brick pattern for that, to help really designate and set off this as a pedestrian crossing.
Yeah, but that's at the intersection, right? Signal
no, it's at all mid blocks. It's
at all of them. Also?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I never paid attention.
Yep. It's at all crossings in the downtown in this area. Yeah.
I think that's a great discussion for phase 2.
And that's exactly, Gary, you're right.
Tactics. Dr. Saito, you brought up the issue about balancing do you see a bullet point in here that you would change or that you would add?
Oh, no. I mean, the statement is,
looked at this
it's
and
not, you know,
looked at
this
it. They've made the
top level discussion anyway.
that the balance would be in favor of pedestrians. And that's what really the council statement does here. It prioritizes pedestrians over vehicles.
Mm.
Okay, I have a question about that, maybe for Robert and Gary, because that's really a macro level kind of question. I know, Clancy, we need to move on, but I think I keep finding there's this implied question of, is the council asking TMAC to say, yes, we approve that Center Street should be this walkable mall pedestrian priority? Or because I feel like that decision was made decades ago, right? And we've been moving forward on the assumption that that decision was already made. Is the council asking us to look at that question again? Like, are they saying, should Center Street be a thoroughfare or should it be walkable? Or they said, no, we've decided it's walkable. Now, how do we do it? I'm not quite sure which question they want confirmation on, or both. And Gary, you kind of implied with your greater knowledge of the history, like, you said it's $1 million a block, per block face, we can never afford that. Are we saying we're advocating a vision that we'll never be able to afford? Like, I'm just wondering, is that a concern here? Or are we going from the assumption that this is the plan and how do we do it?
What we had before were actual designs of the street. And we went in and it was a complete redo of the street. We dealt with infrastructure issues on the street also. The crown is too high in many areas of the road. And we lowered the crown. We did lots and lots of things to the street because we are starting from the premise of let's not worry about what Center Street has been or is now. If we were starting fresh on a brand new street in our downtown, how would we have it be? And that's the approach we took. And now what we're coming back to is there's been conversation ever since then. Okay, we have Center Street. How do we want it to operate? Yes, we say it's a pedestrian mall, but we have a bit of a conflict. We say in our code, it's a pedestrian mall, but at the same time, we encourage nearly 20,000 vehicles to come through it a day. And sometimes we prioritize pedestrians, sometimes we don't. Pedestrians feel safe at the lighted intersections, but not at the mid-block crossings. And so we're kind of half in, half out. And I think the council has come in with this vision statement, and TMAC has done this not just last spring, but when TMAC first started several years ago, this is one of the things TMAC talked about. And they had a statement very similar to this one. And so what the council, I take this as the council said unanimously, this is our intent. This is what we want to have happen on Center Street. We want pedestrians to have priority over vehicles. We want to make it a destination, not a pass-through. And so now they're asking TMAC, okay, do you agree with this vision? And if you do agree with the vision, then the next phase of this is, what projects can you do to make this vision come true? And as part of that, analyzing the impacts those projects would have on the greater community. Yes, there are regional issues, but yes, there are local issues. And analyzing those we'll need to do in the future. But right now, to kind of put to bed, are we really a pedestrian mall? Are we not a pedestrian mall? Are we half? Are we kind of in, kind of out? Here's a statement. Does TMAC individually and as a group, what do you think of this statement? Would you change it?
So that is a macro level question. They're not saying, how do we implement the vision yet? They're saying, do we agree with the vision?
Yeah, we are not asking how you implement that. we're asking the big 60,000 foot view, is this the vision for Center Street that we really have as a community? Because we've talked about it. Downtown Provo Inc. has talked about it. The business owners said, yeah, we think we want this vision. Bike walk, TMAC in the past, the council. Lots of people have said, yeah, we think we want this vision. But if you look at this vision and what's happening out there on the street today, there's some incongruities with it.
Mhm.
And so if this really is our vision, then the next step is, okay, how in the most responsible, reasonable way do we go forward implementing this vision and come up with a game plan to do it while still understanding the impacts of our transportation decisions on the city as a whole, and on businesses, and on residents. So first step is this document right in front of you today.
Okay, well, I will speak to that then for myself. I don't know that we've ever asked the question, Clancy, as a TMAC, should Center Street be a walkable mall? We've always gone from that assumption. So I would just say, if we could start from scratch and everything was new, I would keep Center Street as a thoroughfare since it connects to the freeway and it goes east-west to Provo and no other road does, except now we have 300 South. And I would move all the historical buildings to 100 North. But given that we can't do that, and given that there is such strong preference from large portions of the community for Center Street to be the walkable part, and there aren't charming historical buildings facing 100 North to the same extent as Center Street, I guess I would be okay signing off on essentially, if this is the will of the people of Provo, that's what we do with Center Street, I am okay with that, even though it seems like from a traffic engineering perspective, it's going to be very difficult to find another east-west thoroughfare. It's doable, but then I think we have to likewise commit to say, what are east-west routes? That has to be part of the conversation. How can we make 100 North a viable option? But I'm okay signing off on this vision if that seems to be what the council and Bike Walk Provo and downtown Provo all feel is a good thing, as well as many citizens, then I'm at peace with that. So that's my macro level comment. If I don't know Clancy or anyone else, if you have macro level comments.
I don't. I've always operated under the assumption that it is a pedestrian mall, and that's the way it is, and that's kind of where we were last year. So I'm good there. So in terms of the council statement, we've all shared our thoughts, and
I'll just say I like the vision.
Yeah.
So
okay.
I don't have anything to add that hasn't been already said. I'm in full support of this vision. Don't know how to implement it, but I'm in full support of the vision.
Well, and again, from a cost, and Gary said, we're not looking at that. There's things we can do, whether they're costly or uncostly, what those are. We could look at those later and get that process moving forward. If we understand, okay, this is the vision and we can start moving towards that. We can start with the low hanging fruit and then move upward from there.
Well, I'm good with this vision. I mean, it's a great goal as a goal, and we have to deal with the more specifics. But I think this new city hall building being built, the corner of 500 North and Center Street, is that city's building?
Yeah, that's the new city.
Yeah, that will give a distinctive difference. Now you enter this, whatever the Center Street, main part of the Center Street. And if drivers are told, let's say we are thinking about a rerouting plan. You know, if you go through 300 South, takes signals coordinated, blah, 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 so many minutes. If you go through the Center Street, it's 15 miles per hour. If you take 100 North, go to 200 East, it takes so much. Like in Japan or China, put the graphic board and then color coded, you know.
Absolutely.
Yes,
These are
Laura?
ideas. These are ideas. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Matsu, that are on the table. I think we've thrown those out there. We just want to make sure that both the council, TMAC, that is the vision. And if that's the intent, kind of the intent
I think,
statement, that helps us guide to say, yeah, we're serious about this. And so we want to talk about these all ideas again back on the table to say that's kind of the direction we want to go.
Clancy, could I suggest a way forward based on what I'm hearing is TMAC agrees with the vision, this document in front of you. The first set of bullet points, our vision for Center Street between 500 West and 200 East is, I'm hearing a lot of support for that the vision is fine. I'm hearing in the timing and implementation section that the first two bullet points, we probably need to change in some fashion. The first one dealing with all east-west transportation projects. We ought to analyze those in light of Center Street, in the impacts of Center Street. And then refining the second bullet point that infrastructure shouldn't be overhauled in one large project if it's going to damage businesses and some things along those lines. What I would suggest is let us as staff, Robert and I, we will go ahead and we've taken this input, we'll draft up some language and send out to TMAC members dealing with those two bullet points on timing and implementation. And if you can agree with them, we can go back and forth. We can have a document, hopefully within a very short period of time through email, that would be a recommendation from TMAC to the municipal council of what the formal vision the city has for Center Street. That would be step one. Step two is to now go forward, and if you would ask for a vote, if everybody agrees to that. The number two would be to go forward, and I know Shane's here and Rob's here from engineering, to talk about, are there any low-hanging fruit, regardless of what our vision is, that could be done on Center Street? And what type of projects those would be, and could get started on those. Larger projects, we probably need to have more in-depth conversations and eventually come up with a list of projects that TMAC would recommend to the municipal council that would implement this vision. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that sounds great, Gary. The only thing I'd say is that I think, given that we meet once a month, I don't think we'll be able to make much progress if we are generating the ideas for implementation. I think it'll be much more effective if there is a list of options of ideas that we can then discuss and how they relate to the policy and vision, and make our recommendation as to preferred approach.
And with that, I think the recommendation, you would ask for, what we could do is ask for recommendations from Public Works. And we also have recommendations from Downtown Provo Inc. and
Bike
Walk, that at the next meeting, we could come in and go through those.
Yeah, I think that'd be great.
And would be a list of recommendations. Then in some fashion, we could go through those. Public Works would have a time to go through them and analyze them. And then we can begin the process with that, rather than asking TMAC, what are the design standards that you would come up with. Now, having said that, we would want any individual TMAC member that had an idea and wanted it to be discussed or a concept, then please give us that information and we'll add that to the list.
Absolutely. Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks, Gary. I think we can move on to the 100 East item now.
Do we not need to take a formal vote then, Clancy?
I thought we'd vote next time. Did I misunderstand?
after Roger, Gary.
On the vision, what I had suggested is if you voted for the vision statement in front of you, subject to staff's tweaking the first two bullet points under timing and implementation, which we would send back and forth through email. So and then once everybody bought off on it through email, then that is the final recommendation back to the council.
So we can vote now on what you just said and then work out the wording through email.
Yes.
Okay.
If there's a motion to do that in a second, we could do that.
I so move.
And I'll second that.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. And any opposed? Okay, so I think that's unanimous.
Okay, so we'll start working on those two bullet points under timing and implementation. And hopefully by the end of the week, we'll have an email out to you with a document that shows the changes.
Did we lose Joy? Was she planning on leaving?
Did we lose Joy?
Because she's not connected anymore.
No,
Just
she
bringing
did
that
not.
to your attention.
Thank you. I did not notice that. We'll try and contact her and see if something's going. Crystal, could you see if you could find Joy?
Yeah, I will do that.
We have 4 for the quorum though, so I think we're okay on the vote, but we'll make sure to involve her in working out those bullets. Okay, do we want to move on to the 100 East discussion now? Or where did we want to go next, Robert, in light of your kind of suggested approach to this discussion?
Well, I was thinking that it would be good to have a discussion about interim design standard or interim design measures and kind of make sure that everybody understands what that is and how those could be used. We've been talking about them a little bit, and maybe just to kind of give an overall view of that. Mitsu was suggesting some things of the way a crosswalk can be painted, provides an optical situation that alerts drivers that maybe this is a little different, and it causes them to slow down. Other suggestions and ways that those types of things have been done are a few years ago along 5th North by the rec center. There were some, I think they used hay bales, right? And kind of designed through hay bales and paint how that intersection would actually function on a more permanent basis. And so it gave residents, drivers, pedestrians, everybody a chance to kind of experience it and test it out before the larger expense was put into place. And so those are some things, and frankly, those are some things that we would love to see implemented a little bit more, to allow people the opportunity to actually see how different design measures would work out, and to see if it would actually be a solution or if it's the wrong one. So does TMAC support those types of efforts?
Yeah, I'm definitely supportive of those efforts. Try it out without making it permanent and see what we learn and figure out. I think we need to be cautious because sometimes big changes require time for people to get used to, and so we also run the risk that we try something and the initial reaction is negative, even though if it were there permanent, people would get used to it and be happy with it eventually. So I think that's my only fear with that. But in general, yes, I really like that approach. Okay.
I think that's just something that we wanted to bring up, have a discussion about. I know that Javin is actually, the city is receiving money from the scooters, and the intent of those payments is to find ways to kind of implement small incremental changes that could be made. He has some signage designs that draw attention to like the mid-block crossings on Center Street that could be easily erected just to see if that's something that could help both drivers and pedestrians feel a little bit safer downtown, because it draws attention to the fact that there is a mid-block crossing there, kind of what David was talking about. And so that's something that he'd like to do. And that's just an example of ways that we could do those things.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, so I think that with all of that, we're ready to move on.
Okay. Okay, let's go ahead. Yeah, let's go ahead to the 100 East discussion then.
So I've got that here. I think it'll probably be Shane, unless you want to totally take this on, maybe a joint discussion. The thing that we wanted to bring up as we were talking about Center Street, and let me share my screen here.
Yeah, so I asked Rob, and this came up last week TMAC meeting, when we were talking about 200 East, and again with the master plan changes, because of kind of the direction that was headed, saying, yeah, we need to start rerouting, or the vision to start looking how to initially start taking traffic, or have some kind of designation street, what that is, to start taking, maybe the ability to start taking traffic off of Center Street. The master plan identified 2nd East as the street, kind of that rerouting street around Center Street, that could be that roadway or that facility that would help accommodate that vision. As part of that, this was already kind of somewhat has happened. The council has already adopted. There is a development that has come in on 100 called Blue Sky on 100 East. And so they have already been approved for some of the infrastructure that would make it difficult now to begin using 100 East as that bypass, or that thoroughfare to start rerouting, or potentially rerouting traffic over to 100 North. So I've asked Rob some of the things that we have as far as the design for 100 Street, what has been approved for 100 East, and then also some of the things that we have already kind of designed that we were looking at installing on 100 or on Center Street near 100 East. So I've asked Rob to kind of put that together and kind of present that to you.
Yeah, so once again, we're looking at trying to reroute. One of the big things of being able to make this more walkable and feel safer, as we talked about, is just try to give people an alternative path to get around there on 100 North. One of the things that we have run into, though, is we have it was originally identified, as Shane had talked about, of coming down off of 200 East. Because it's also the bicycle facility, the question became, okay, do we go down 100 East? But as we talk through these decisions, we do want to make sure that we get the vision statement correct, and we can move forward. I guess having the vision statement correct can come forward with recommendations or possibilities for y'all to discuss. But one of the concerns is with the timing of everything. The further we get along, sometimes the more development happens according to our code, people going according to our code, but then it limits our ability to maintain those options. And one of those being 100 East. The Blue Sky development down here on the corner of Center Street and 100 East on the northeast corner was approved, I think, 2 or 2.5 years ago. And with the intent at that time that 100 East was just going to be a local street, they were approved with the design that you see. They actually went through a couple of iterations, but whether it's parallel parking, as you see along here, or whether it's now or in the future putting in.
Rob, we see the GIS map still right now. Are you expecting that we see something else?
It is showing up on my screen as being a PDF. Let me see.
Is it just me seeing the map still?
No, I see the same thing, Clancy.
You might need to switch screens, Rob.
Okay, let me make sure. All right.
There you go.
So
Yeah, there we go.
Okay. So this is what I was speaking to. This is the blue sky development that was approved with the design that you see up to the end of their project of doing. There was they had come forward with an option of parallel parking. They'd come forward with an option of angled parking, but one way or the other, it's angled parking with the bulb outs, as you see here. Approved with what our design standard was at the time with the 28-foot stretch. I guess what would be, they're just doing their side of the street right now. But if we carried that, we also have I guess before I move on, but we also have a project that is proposing to go in right here at the north, or excuse me, at the southwest corner of 100 East and 100 North. And if we were to move forward with the design concept that had been put in place when Blue Sky was developed, that really limits our ability. I mean, they're moving forward with the approval and depending on street parking on 100 East. If we did the same thing there on the west side, we've basically eliminated the possibility of having our north-south connector back over to Center Street between 100 North and Center Street be 100 East. And so it is, I guess, an overall question and needing to see what we need to do to move forward. I guess what TMAC's direction forward is on if you have a preference. I guess we need to decide sooner than later where we need to start looking at, or where we need to make the final decision on how we're going to make the connection from Center Street to 100 North. 100 East is, like I said, starting to become less of a possibility. 200 East is the bike facility. If we push it further east, we're probably talking 400 East, which is the next collector street. But then we're keeping traffic on 100 North for a lot longer than the original intent was. So I guess we're looking for feedback from y'all on, and I guess it's part letting you know some things that are happening, and part looking for feedback then on direction that you think we should go.
I have a question.
Sure.
So I would imagine that most of the traffic is between Center Street and the freeway. And I think when I've heard the counts, it's not as much going east. What if we left a bidirectional for lower volume going to the east, and you could get through there, albeit it's lower volume, maybe it's a little slower. And I don't love this idea because it breaks the east-west. I get that. But what if we brought most of that freeway traffic up and it ended at Center Street, and we try to solve the east connectivity from this neighborhood a different way rather than trying to route it on the same route as the freeway traffic? Has anyone looked at that? Is that even an option?
Shane, do you know the volume numbers on Center Street?
Yeah, so let me
east of University?
So let me give you a little perspective on this. So Center Street around 500 West, we have anywhere, depending on, time of year, 18,000 up to about 22,000 cars a day. As you get over to 200 East, as we get over there and down Center Street, we even have dropped down now to about anywhere between 9 and 12,000 cars a day. So somewhere between 500 West and 2nd East on Center Street, we get a substantial reduction of vehicles along there. Now the distribution east-west, I can't say it would be 50-50. It would be time of day. Some of that is commuter, because one of the things that we looked at initially when I was working with the state, and we have finished phase 1 of the environmental, which is the data collection on of the existing condition of I-15, and some of those things, looking at, and some of the regional model, okay, and plugging that in. We just did an exercise just to quickly see if an interchange was put somewhere between Center Street and Parkway, what does that do to some of kind of the local streets? opening days, what they showed is, from a modeling perspective, 6,000 cars come off of Center Street. So what that showed is a lot of the movement, at least from that perspective, a lot of the movement is a commuter type movement. Much of that probably in volume change between the 22 or 18 to 9 or 12 is probably some of it is directional. Some of the the peak hour volumes traveling one direction at one time, traveling the other direction at the other time. But you can see the variation in volume with that. Somewhere they go. Some of it may be second west. We have cut off left turns on University Avenue, so we know it's not necessarily going University Avenue, but that's where it's at. That's the volume today.
Sorry, Shane, could you say
Okay.
those numbers one more time? It's 23,000.
Yeah, we
On
last
West
counted just before the COVID was, because we were doing a safety analysis on, and we were just over 18,000. We have counted in the past up to I think almost 22. That was prior to 500 West project. That did change some traffic patterns, so we didn't really have a good solid of what the traffic patterns are because of 500 West. Center Street, we've done counts on Center Street east of Second East, and like I said, we're anywhere between. As you go east, we're down probably around around the school. We counted the school area. I think we were just below 10,000 or right around 10,000, and it kind of can jump up to Second East to almost 12 in that area.
And is 10,000, is that a minor collector or a minor arterial? Where does that put us by definition?
By definition, you're right at a 3-lane road. You'd be a collector street volume. We start getting above that according to master plan, our livability street standards, you start getting above that volume, that 12,000 volume, you start getting into what we would go into an arterial street.
Thank you.
So what I was thinking was with that lower volume, because there's not a lot of growth to the east, right? It's all built. Could we potentially would we see the volume? Could we see the volume go up in the future?
Yes,
to the east?
and that's what I wanted to help you understand is you guys we need to understand this regionally, and that's coming from MAG and what is happening around Provo City. Provo City stays the major employment hub in the next 30 years for the Utah County. In that 30-year period, we go from 500,000 people up to 1.5 million. We become equal with Salt Lake. Salt Lake has about a little over 1 million. They become 1.5 million. Utah County goes from a little over 500 up to 1.5 million. That's some substantial growth, and a lot of that is going to be tied to employment. But with that, one of the major areas of growth in the county will be South Utah County. What that will be is what they're showing based on their plans is going to be residential, and we're not taught high density, but more of the multifamily, which do commute into the major employment hubs, bypass through Provo through I-15. So yes, what they're showing is yes, traffic will come up.
Okay.
But that is, I mean, Center Street, I guess I can't see Center Street being the place that people go because they're either going to go 300 south or they're going to come off the freeway at University.
Well, University becomes a problem, right? University volume wise, again, becomes an issue. Again, this is a regional type problem where through Provo City, we start to develop a substantial east-west mobility problem. Some of that is tied because we only interchanges and to get into Provo City, out of Provo City becomes a challenge. And so that's where we've got to start developing that network, what we call mobility, to redistribute that, not just, like you said, on just certain major streets, but throughout the city. So University, though, does become, and we've limited the capacity of University, and some from a vehicle standpoint. for the mode of transit, which I think is a great thing. But that does limit Center Street, especially from a signal timing standpoint of now we have a barrier. It's created a barrier in certain instances for mobility east-west in the city.
If we did use 200 East as the connector point between Center and 100 North, could you guys tell us some of the vision that you've thought, or kind of the plan you've thought of, and especially how you would accommodate that bike corridor that goes through there?
I can tell you right now, we haven't gone down that path. I think
Okay,
that was part of, again, where we were looking maybe from TMAC and also from the council, help us understand the vision of Center Street. And that's defined, that goes back to kind of our discussion, that's defined. We're committed to make that happen. And so in committing to make that happen, these are some of the tough decisions and discussions of things that we would need to look at. We haven't really looked at it other than identified this currently would be the path of choice just because of what has been approved from a development perspective.
What kind of development is Blue Sky, and what was across the street from them that is being proposed?
Gary, do you? Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say Blue Sky is a multifamily. What's being proposed here is also, I think it's, I don't know exactly what they call it. It's a special needs apartment,
Provo
basically.
Housing.
Provo Housing.
Yeah, so Robert Vernon from Provo Housing, they've purchased that spot. They're going to do elderly housing and special needs housing there in a high-rise type structure.
And how tall is the Blue Sky development? Do we know that?
I think it's 6 stories.
6. Yeah, I was going to say,
Okay.
I think it was 6. That's what I recall, 6 stories.
Okay, thank you.
Or Joy, I don't know if you were going to had something to say. I don't want to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Looking at the state of things now, I mean, if we were to change course a little bit and use 100 East, we're obviously creating a new problem where there's pretty high density housing going in on 100 East that would then have a significant amount of traffic trying to get through as well. So I don't love that idea. Second East, it's tough reconciling the bike corridor with the major vehicle corridor as well. But I think I said this last meeting, and I'll say it again. I think using Second East, we can treat this as an opportunity rather than a challenge. We heard a lot about last meeting about how Second East, we still need to slow cars down. We still need to make it more bicycle friendly. And I think if we design that block of Second East from Center to 100 North with a separate bike facility on the side and change the 100 East, 100 North intersection into essentially a forced left turn for northbound vehicles and only let bikes continue north. I think this challenge we have of fitting a lot of vehicles and a bicycle corridor on Second East for that block, like I said, it becomes an opportunity to close Second East a little more to be a primarily bicycle corridor while still providing the major vehicle access on that street. And that's not an easy design problem, but I think if we approach it that way, it really can be a win-win. Because I think 100 East aggravates other problems if we were to kind of change course to it.
So Rob, what has to happen to the right of way? How much has to be purchased? What does the right of way need to be? I mean, what is it right now, and what is it going to need to be? What's impact is it going to have? I think that's a mortuary right there.
It is correct.
And I could tell you from that, Dave, we have no idea.
You have no idea.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, I could.
and the ideas that you're actually bringing up, absolutely. I think right now is what we want to say and bring to you is some of the things as we go down through, how this vision plays out does have, what we talk about, the things that we're going to need to deal with as we hold that vision, as development happens, things change, we hold that. These are some of the things that we're going to need to discuss and what that means. Absolutely. Again, things will have to be on the table and we can look at various things to accommodate, that vehicle movement, and try to continue to use that as a bicycle corridor. But understanding the plan that has been adopted, we got a kind of conflicting plans here between the bike plan, that's been adopted for Second East, and now our master plan that helps kind of try to continue that vision that's on center that we're talking about on Center Street. So we don't have anything identified as saying it needs to be this or that. Our typical now, because it's a minor arterial, our typical street standard and is a 50-foot pavement section. It's an 80-foot right-of-way section.
What's the distance between the sidewalks there, Rob?
It's about 80 feet. The thing that it becomes, and we may find that, that this is the right amount of room, but with a 50-foot right of way, if you're putting bikes on there, then really you're still just talking about a 3-lane street, right? With some sort of bike facility to the side. So
I would just like to say thank you to everyone for letting me ask about 100 East. I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just really want Provo to have a robust and functioning transportation network. And I'm trying to think out of the box sometimes and say, well, what can we do? So thank you for letting me ask that.
I think these are important questions, Joy. So I'm glad you brought
Keep
it up.
asking, Joy.
Yeah.
And I like Clancy's
Shane, I have a
perspective
question.
that
How much of
it's
the
dangerous.
traffic
Real
would
quick, everyone. I have
use
a
200
hard
East?
stop at 2.
Do you
Just
have
so you know,
any,
I'm gonna have to jump out in a minute.
So the
model or
the
something
volume
that,
on 200 East, is that what you're asking?
yeah,
it's
suppose
very,
if you use the as a viable detour route, sort of, right? How much percentage of the current traffic or future traffic might use this section? Do you have any modeling type?
So let me tell you now from a bicycle perspective and how this all fits. So if you have the transit center down there, that we have the transit center down at the intermodal center, we're putting in, additional pedestrian facilities, bike facilities. That connects down 6 South to 200 East. 200 East all the way then would become that kind of thoroughfare, as one of the major thoroughfares to get around the city from that intermodal north, north-south, through the city, BYU being a major one of those hubs, destinations. So that is as a larger perspective is how 200 East fits into that. Right now, from a traffic volume, right now today, 200 East is I believe, Rob, is below 2,000.
Okay.
From a bike perspective, as actually it's one of our highest bicycle used. I mean, from a street perspective, it's one of the higher ones in the city that's used as a bike facility.
right. So for right now, on the very north, kind of on the northern end, is the highest ADTs, and we're just above 2,000. I mean, you get closer to Center Street, it goes down, and actually south of Center Street, some of these sections are less than 1,000 vehicles a day. So, but yeah, right through the stretch. And maybe correct me if I'm misspeaking, since I am new to the came in after the transportation master plan was done. But my understanding of the transportation master plan is their modeling and everything still assumed Center Street as the
arterial,
and then they came in and recommended, hey, if you want to get it off Center Street, just bring that one street north. And so there was not a hard look at that's just making the assumption that we put in enough stuff to just reroute it around one street north. It kind of depends, or it highly depends, I would say. It highly depends on what we do. as to how many are going to, what the split is actually going to be, how many are going to go down 100 North and how many are going to go down Center Street. So I don't believe that there were alternative things that were looked at from the master planning standpoint.
And we didn't. We just said, all right, this has kind of been the vision of the Center Street as far as we understand it, to start removing that. We will identify this kind of like there's just some lines on the map to say, here's how we, see. That's kind of what we've been discussed, how we accomplish that to make that happen. Again, that's part of a discussion that's going to need to happen. I mean, we've talked about various things, but again, that's going to have to be discussed in the future, and what that looks like, what the features are. Do we realign road? Do we buy property? Do we do all those things? Do we not? Do we design it a certain way that discourages and makes a free flow movement? All these things are absolutely on the table.
Well, I need to go to another meeting, so I'll get off.
Yeah, I think we all do.
See you later. Thank you for your explanation. Thank you.
Thanks, Vincent. Yeah, so I think that was actually maybe a good time to call the meeting.
Shane, are you going to, sorry, Robert, really quickly. Shane, will you be in trouble on those CDBG grant plans if we don't vote on that today?
No, and what I'm looking for is just as part of our application, a recommendation maybe, and I think you kind of gave it to me last time with TMAC, the last meeting, is just say, here's the projects that we have. We have 2 major projects that we have some pedestrian, active transportation things that we want to address. One was the Franklin area. We are going to be doing our major road rehabilitation project in here for next year. So we're going to be doing some of the sidewalk concrete improvements in there, but we want to continue that effort as we've gotten a lot of comments in that area to start helping with the sidewalk and the mobility in that Franklin area. Again, I think that seemed from what I'd gotten last time was the higher priority than the improvements down by the pedestrian bridge that needs to be finished by 2022. That has to be in place and constructed by 2022. There's just some sidewalk improvements down there that need to be made. So that was the other project. I think both are high priorities for the Public Works Department to help with that active transportation. I know that's been a priority for TMAC. And so I think from I got last time, it seemed to be that maybe your recommendation would first be the Franklin neighborhood, then the pedestrian bridge area. So I think, am I correct in that assumption?
That was correct. Yes, I think that was correct. Do you think so? Is that what you got to, or anyone else?
Okay. Any other items before we head out, guys? Appreciate your thoughts, Rob and Shane. Thank you for all of your efforts that you do. So,
appreciate it.
Our next meeting is scheduled for the second week in December. Are there any conflicts with that right now, or? Okay, then we'll schedule that. We'll send out an agenda. If there are items that you'd like to talk about as members, please just send those to me and we can put those on the agenda. Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you, everyone.